is SMNI News Channel. Truth that matters.
Good evening and welcome to SMNI. You're watching Business and Politics. I'm your host, Dante Klink. Tonight's program was supposed to be the first after a 30-day suspension imposed on this network by the National Telecommunications Commission. But as you know, the NTC recently extended that suspension indefinitely. Thankfully, the network's program can be still seen online and on select cable channels. The NTC orders were the result of a House committee recommendation that sanctioned 2 SMNI programs, and during that congressional hearing, 2 anchors were detained by the House Committee on Legislative Franchises. They have since been released, but not before our guest this evening went to the Supreme Court to appeal for their liberty. We are referring, of course, to Attorney Harry Roque, himself a host of an SMNI program, Pulso ng Bayan. He's perhaps better known as a spokesperson for former President Rodrigo Duterte. Attorney Roque's career prior to his service in Malacanang revolved around practicing and teaching law. He taught at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, and his clients included families of the victims of the Maguindanao Massacre. Later, he moved on to crafting laws. In 2015, he was elected as a representative of the Kabayan Party List. He served in Congress until 2017 when he was named the presidential spokesperson. Our discussions tonight will cover politics and law, particularly media rights. We'll begin with asking Attorney Roque, how do you assess the political landscape now, and what does it mean to press freedom? Secretary Harry Roque, thank you for making time for Business and Politics.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. I think it's my first.
Normally, you're the one doing the interview. You're hosting the program, but now you're in the hot seat, so to speak. As I said, there are a lot of things happening politically. I wanted to start off with how you read things. I know it's sort of the beginning of the year still. Things are very fluid. There are some developments just this week. Lots of meetings going on. Just from your perspective, how do you see things politically?
Well, what is clear is we're not sure who's really in charge.
Okay.
I'll give an example. The president already gave the order, stop this unconscionable pirma, which is the word that he used, unconscionable, when he learned that bribes were being paid.
Money,
And he directed the Senate to take the lead, either through Constituent Assembly or through legislation. There was supposedly a heated discussion in the presence of the President himself with the House Speaker and Senate President Zubiri and Senate President Pro Tempore Ligarda in attendance. And it was agreed that the Senate would take the lead. But what did we find out days after? That pirma did not cease, that they continued to gather signatures, and they have been submitting these signatures, in fact, to the COMELEC. This despite express instructions from the President to stop this pirma and for the Senate to take the lead. That's one. Now, there's a second issue. Amidst the proclamation and declaration of Justice Secretary Remulla, that contrary,
ICC.
Yes, on the ICC, that contrary to the position of the President, which he communicated to the country 7 months ago that there will be no cooperation with the ICC. Secretary Remulla 4 days ago made it very clear that we will now cooperate with the ICC. And when asked why, well, Secretary Remulla said, well, because there are House resolutions calling on us to cooperate. Now, this is the same formula used on us, SMNI, Technically speaking, the House resolutions to revoke or suspend our franchise has no legal value because it was not concurred in by the Senate. And yet that was enough to be taken by the executive branch of government as a sense of the House and therefore they could not ignore it. In fact, the NTC cited the House resolution as a basis for first putting us on a 30-day preventive suspension, and then now an indefinite suspension. No? So now I wonder, with the latest pronouncement of the President that we will not cooperate with the ICC, will the Speaker again defy the President? Now, take note that, of course, I went to school with the House Speaker and Justice Secretary Remulla. We're all contemporaries. We're all friends, even from law school, even from pre-law, in fact. No? And I know for a fact that although I consider myself as an intergenerational friend of Justice Secretary Remulla, because our parents are very close friends as we are, the reality is he is not only a schoolmate of the House Speaker, he's also a fraternity brother, no, in Upsilon, Sigma Phi. No? And therefore, I could very well understand why Secretary Remulla, despite his personal closeness to President Duterte, later on, just 4 days ago, said, we will now cooperate with the ICC. But with the President saying that we will not cooperate with the ICC, will the same thing happen as Pirma? You know, obviously, House Speaker and his allies, and Justice Secretary Remulla is one of the Speaker's closest allies, I would say, will they defy also the President? Which made me think, is this really an issue of defiance? Or is it an issue of double talk?
I was going to ask you, are you being rhetorical, or do you think that there is a grand design here that people are saying, well, this must have something to do with 2025 or 2028? What's your take?
You see, on the one hand, there's a possibility it's an open defiance. If it is, the question is, why is the President taking this sitting down? What does the Speaker have on him? Which, you know, gives a sense of entitlement to the Speaker to defy him, no, on very fundamental and major issues that have divided this nation. No? At the same time, it makes you wonder, is this really a defiance or pursuant to a grand plan of good guy, bad guy? Where the President says, I'm against it, but go ahead and do it anyway because we want it done. No? We can never know. Or is it an instance of, is the President really in charge? Could it be that there are times when the President, in fact, is not in charge, and that because there are times when he's not in charge, the House Speaker and other individuals have to fill up? No,
that's a loaded question, but you have, as you said, you know some of the personalities very well. The Speaker one, and of course the Secretary of Justice. What's your take? I mean, do you know? And of course you have, I'm sure you have your ear on the ground, so to speak, talking to different people. What is your sense? Do you think there is a grand design, or do you think this is an evolution of something, maybe the rise of different forces, or something else? I mean,
what's very clear is that the House Speaker wants to be President or head of state. He seems frustrated because this early, the numbers probably make it appear that it's impossible for him to be President in 2028.
So maybe Prime Minister.
So now, obviously, the Pirma, with you know, the amendment that they want being to silence the Senate, is obviously intended to introduce revisions that would make us into a parliamentary form of government and remove the bicameral system of legislation. No? So that to me is a very viable explanation behind this move. Why else would they want to shut up Senate on any proposed revisions or amendments to the Constitution? No? But I think it goes beyond that. Because number one, you don't understand why he did it so early. You know, we're not even done with midterm elections. Midterm election is only a barometer of how influential the current administration is, because the performance of their candidates for senator will more or less give us an indication of how popular the administration is. No? So why was it so premature?
Wouldn't you say that maybe it's done early because the President is precisely popular, that maybe it's, you know, this is his time to capitalize on, you know, a major initiative such as what we're seeing right now? No? I mean, isn't there a political strategy explanation for that sort of initiative, you think?
But then I forgot that in citing the instances where the House Speaker defied the President, this was the first issue where he defied the President, because he said we don't need charter change for economic development.
That's what I wanted.
He said so, no? So I forgot that there are 3 instances already where he defied, no? So it makes me wonder now whether or not it's coincidental, or is it because House Speaker knows that the president is really not in charge and he can get his way any which way?
I see.
It's the only explanation.
Are you surprised that, as you said, these things are happening this early in the presidential term?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I also dabbled in politics, and
Yes.
I know that timing is everything in
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that it's out of sync, really, out of tune to
Okay.
aspire to be president now, unless he feels that he's already running government as of now.
Hmm.
And it's just a matter of crowning him as president or prime minister, as chief executive. No?
Now-
So now I'm thinking, perhaps he's really calling the shots.
Okay.
And that's why it's not an issue of defiance. It's the fact he's just doing everything as if it's business as usual, because he makes the decisions and not the president.
What would be the implications of that? Say if it's true, your theory is true. What would be the serious implications of that? I mean, having the speaker, as you said, running the show, and the president allowing him to do so.
Well, the problem, of course, he was only elected by a few individuals in one district.
Okay.
Out of 318 seats in Congress, he only holds
Okay.
one of them. Whereas 31 million people, or 30 million people, I stand corrected,
Yeah.
voted for the president. So he does not have the same mandate that the president has, and therefore it is the president who should be ruling and not him.
Have you had a chance to sit down and maybe take a phone call or phone the speaker and say, what's going on? Have you had a chance to maybe talk to people around him? What have you been hearing?
Well,
as you said, you were close at one time.
Yeah, and he did say so as well, that he
Yeah.
was. We were good friends because when we were students, he had just returned from Hawaii from the exile, and of course, no one was talking to him in the UP College of Law because UP is UP.
Yeah.
So I thought, I really don't care who you are, for as long as you're a good person, I'll talk
Yeah.
to you. So I gambled.
Yeah.
It was a gamble because, of course, you could be unpopular talking to
You could be
Roque
ostracized,
in
yeah,
UP
yeah.
Diliman. No?
Yeah.
But I don't care less, and
Yeah.
I found him to be personable enough, and I would say
A lot
I
of
became
people say
friends with
he's-
him. No?
a lot of people say
He's
he's
very
funny.
personable. He's
Yeah.
very likable. No? He's very sociable. No? But the things that are happening now are completely unexpected. No?
Okay.
I did not expect that he had this personality, that he would want the position of president or chief executive of the country so badly, so early. To the extent that, in the campaign, and I joined the campaign of Unit Team,
Yes.
he was there at every rally, and his only chore was to introduce the vice president. And look what happened now.
Yeah.
He's the number one nemesis of the vice president. So it makes you wonder, really. Maybe they say, well, anything is possible in politics, but it makes you really wonder what happened, no? What happened? And until now, I can't find the answers.
And if we assign these developments as purely political, going back to SMNI, do you think this is a phase that will pass maybe after the critical time has gone? I mean, the election of 2025, 2028, or is this, you think, a more long-term challenge that's facing this network and, in a sense, Philippine press freedom in general?
Well, of course, what they did to us is an outright suppression of freedom of the press and freedom of expression.
Okay.
No doubts about it. Let's not even discuss why. Because the Constitution says that the guarantee of freedom of expression is, number one, a guarantee against prior restraint, censorship, and number two is subsequent punishment.
Yeah.
And of course, in the case of SMNI, they did both.
Yeah.
They had prior restraint because they suspended us without according us opportunity to be heard, which is also denial of our due process rights. And secondly, we're being punished for daring to question whether or not it is true that the travel expenses of the speaker has amounted already to an excess of $1 billion.
That was a question, but we have to go on break. But let me just ask this question real quick. A lot of people are saying that, in a sense, SMNI is being hypocritical because when ABS-CBN was facing its problems with its franchise in Congress, there were some people who said that SMNI had supported that. But now that SMNI is going through a period of difficulty, that it all of a sudden is crying press freedom. Do you think there is legitimacy to that criticism?
Forgive the language, but that horse crap.
Okay.
Why? Because ABS-CBN's its franchise had lapsed.
All right.
It no longer had the privilege to broadcast. We have that privilege, and jurisprudence says, particularly in DANS, that even if government has more leeway or more control over broadcast media because they own the airwaves, still, freedom of expression and freedom of the press take precedence over any regulatory concern that government may have. In fact, the current jurisprudence is any suppression of freedom of expression comes to court with a very, very heavy presumption of unconstitutionality. It's for government to justify the suppression.
Very, very well said. Okay, we'll have to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Secretary Harry Roque.
Alam mo ba kung ano ang cha-cha o charter change?
Wala po akong idea man kasi hindi ako masyado nagsistay dito sa Pinas.
Wala po kasi ang masyadong information kasi tungkol diyan.
Di po ako masyadong familiar kung paano po siya nag-work, pero naririnig ko na po siya.
Wala talagang idea regarding sa charges change.
Hindi ako sure po.
Ang pag-intindi ko sa charter change, pira yan
Ako talaga hindi ko pa lubos talaga na maiintindihan yan.
Wala talaga akong idea kung ano talaga ibig sabihin ng chat-chat talaga.
Kung ano mas nakakabuti, siyempre, yun ang dapat baguhin.
Hindi ko alam yung kahulugan ng chat-chat change.
Mas maganda kung binabago para mapalitan yung ibang walang kabuluhan.
Charter change, hindi ba yung sa tungkol sa DNR yun?
Yung charter change, yun yung pagbabago ng saligang batas, no? Yung Philippine Constitution ng 1987 ba yan? Oo.
Ano nga ba ang dahilan bakit matunog ang charter change o ang pagbabago ng konstitusyon ng bansa? Ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin nito? Ang cha-cha ay ang legal na proseso para baguhin ang kasalukuyang 1987 Constitution na umiiral sa bansa. Maaaring isagawa ito sa tatlong pamamaraan: ang People's Initiative, Constituent Assembly, at ang Constitutional Convention. Isa-isahin natin ito. Ay ang People's Initiative na sadyang matunog ngayon dahil sa mga kumakalat na isyu tungkol dito. Ang proseso ng pagsasagawa ng People's Initiative ay nakasaad sa Republic Act 6735 o ang Initiative and Referendum Act. Batay dito, ang publiko ay maaaring mag-propose ng mga pagbabago sa konstitusyon sa pamamagitan ng pagkakaroon ng petisyon na pinirmahan ng aabot sa 12% ng kabuang bilang ng mga rehistradong botante. Ang bawat distrito rin ay kinakailangang mairepresenta ng 3% ng rehistradong botante. Mahaba ang prosesong ito at sinasabing magastos dahil sa mga kinakailangang isagawa para makuha ang kinakailangang bilang ng pirma. Dadaan pa rin ito sa beripikasyon ng Commission on Elections o COMELEC. Kung makuha na ang kinakailangang bilang ng pirma at matapos na mailathala ng 2 beses sa mga pahayagan, ang lahat ng botante sa bansa ay magsasagawa ng referendum at magdedesisyon kung aaprubahan ba o hindi ang nasabing pagbabago sa konstitusyon. Kinakailangan ay sumang-ayon ang publiko para maisakatuparan ito. Magiging epektibo ito 15 araw matapos na mailathala sa Official Gazette o pahayagan ng kadalasang binabasa ng publiko o General Circulation. Ang Constituent Assembly naman ay binubuo ng lahat ng mga miyembro ng Bicameral Congress ng Pilipinas. Ito ay ang Senado at House of Representatives. Sa ilalim ng Article 17 ng 1987 Constitution, ang mga pagbabago ay aaprubahan sa pamamagitan ng boto ng 3/4 ng lahat ng mga miyembro ng Kongreso. Ang mababa at mataas na kapulungan ng Kongreso ay bumoboto ng magkahiwalay para sa mga pagbabago. Sa Constitutional Convention, ang mamamayan naman ang boboto sa mga uupo para aralin at baguhin ang saligang batas. Mayroon ng 5 Constitutional Convention na ginawa sa bansa. Nariyan ang Malolos Congress, Philippine Constitutional Convention of 1934, Preparatory Committee for Philippine Independence, Philippine Constitutional Convention of 1971, at Philippine Constitutional Commission na itinalaga noong 1986. Sa ilalim ng charter change, maaring ipanukala ang amendment o revision sa saligang batas. Mukhang pareho, pero magkaiba ang dalawang ito. Ang amendments ay yung mga pagbabago sa ilang probisyon ng konstitusyon nang hindi iniiba ang istruktura nito, habang ang revision naman ay tumutukoy sa posibleng pagsulat muli ng buong konstitusyon. ay ilan lamang sa mga pangunahing konsepto na dapat nating malaman kaugnay sa pagbabago ng ating konstitusyon. Kaya ano ba sa tingin ninyo ang pinaka-epektibong paraan? At ano rin ba ang gusto ninyong baguhin sa ating saligang batas? Panahon na nga ba upang baguhin ito? Hihintayin po namin ang inyong mga tugon. Patuloy po naming pakikinggan ang inyong mga boses, mga kababayan, dito lamang sa SMNI. Para sa Diyos at sa Pilipinas nating mahal.
Back to Business and Politics. We're talking to former presidential spokesperson Atty. Roque. Sir, over the holidays, you filed a suit with the Supreme Court, but things happened. The anchors were released. I think you dropped that case, but
no, we did not.
You did not.
It was a case of they were released simply because the petition was filed.
Okay, so it doesn't render it moot.
No. It was in fact not just a petition for habeas corpus, which would have been rendered moot with the release, but it was coupled also with certiorari, which is an allegation of grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack of jurisdiction. Because number one, they could not compel Eric to reveal his source pursuant to the recently amended SOTO law. And number two, they were not accorded due process. The Supreme Court had only recently ruled on the Ong versus Senate Blue Ribbon Committee case. This is on the family investigation, where the court really said that you cannot imprison anyone by way of legislative contempt without according them the right to due process. And that's exactly what happened. Can you imagine? In the case of Lorraine Badoy, she was sent to jail because she gave allegedly conflicting answers as to whether or not her program had television ads. What is the relevance anyway of that question? And why would that be contemptuous to Congress? So I think, I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will actually continue to rule on it in the same way that it ruled on the Ong petition even after he had already been released.
What's your prayer there? Because in the Manila Times, we've written several times that maybe these congressional investigations go beyond the Constitution, right? Because sometimes when a witness is irritating the lawmakers, this becomes ground to citing them in contempt and throwing them in jail. And we were saying in our editorial, for instance, in the United States, Congress can only refer criminal action to the Department of Justice, and the DOJ will decide whether or not there's ground to file a case. And in this case, in the Philippines, Congress itself acts as, prosecutor, the judge, and the jury.
Executioner.
Yeah, and the executioner. Imposing, I guess even taking on the power to incarcerate whoever they want.
You see, the problem is, as early as, time immemorial in jurisprudence, we've recognized that the power of legislative contempt is actually necessary for Congress to conduct investigations. But there's been limitations since the case of Bengzon. And Bengzon said when a case had been already filed, whether be it in court or in the ombudsman, I think in court, then you should stop because that's already a judicial function. But until the case is filed in court, they could still investigate because the power to conduct legislative investigations is plenary in nature. And only Congress can define what the purpose is, because it's plenary precisely. But in the Neri decision, the court also said, because due process must be accorded the guests or the witnesses in these investigations, you need, number one, to specify what the legislative inquiry is all about. And number two, you are even required to give the questions ahead of time to the resource person so they can have time to prepare. But what we saw in the House in particular really was they were being asked questions which were foreign to the subject of the investigation. For instance, this alleged criminal act perpetrated by Apollo Kibuloy, what relevance does that have on whether or not the franchise should be revoked when Pastor Kibuloy is not even a shareholder of SMNI? So we know that despite the directive given by the Supreme Court in Neri to narrow down the scope of investigation insofar as it is only necessary for a legislative purpose, that Congress has been wantonly violating this directive.
So what do you want the Supreme Court to do with regard to your petition? I mean, do you expect them to instruct Congress that this is your limitation, right? I mean, it becomes, political in a sense. I mean, this is why we're talking about it now. I mean, we're talking about legitimate reasons of Congress to investigate matters, but when you throw in the political mix in the mix here, it becomes very questionable, right? When you take on certain actions such as taking away people's liberty.
Well, Lorraine and Eric were imprisoned for 1 week.
Sure.
And they want their rights to be vindicated with the ruling that imprisonment is illegal and therefore null and void.
Okay.
We want also the court to rule on the applicability of the SOTO law even in congressional hearings.
Shield law.
And we want the court to declare that the manner by which Badoy was cited in legislative contempt was a grave violation of our due process rights, no? Especially since the question inquired about was completely foreign to the legislative inquiry.
Well, you have to school me here. This is your field. Do you think the Supreme Court will, how will it act? I mean, you're more familiar with that than most people are.
I can't second guess because
of course, but speaking about what is possible within the law.
Well, the court has repeatedly said, and it said so in Ong, that is why they ruled, even if Ong had already been released, and it was a petition for habeas corpus, that they will rule on, number one, very important issues involving violations of the Constitution, especially if it is capable of repetition and yet evasive of judicial review. And I dare say that what Congress did, release them a day after the petition was filed, it's one of those instances because clearly by releasing them, they wanted to render the petition moot and academic because they thought perhaps that we were only filing a petition for habeas corpus, not knowing that we coupled it with certiorari, because the issue of the SOTO law and due process rights will continue to be justiciable despite their release.
And things are very fluid now. I mean, we just heard of the indefinite suspension this week. Is there, another legal remedy that you think, SMNI can look at, or
not SMNI,
or maybe the people who are concerned about press freedom?
SMNI is doing what it can. Its lawyers went to the Court of Appeals because of a rule that decisions of quasi-judicial bodies must be filed, must be questioned before the Court of Appeals. They went there. Unfortunately, it was not a speedy and adequate remedy because it was dismissed on the basis that they failed to file a motion for reconsideration before the NTC to give it an opportunity to correct itself. But you see, they imposed a 30-day preventive suspension without hearing even the side of SMNI. What's there to be corrected, for crying out loud? That's patently illegal. Because they were already convicted before they were even informed of the charges against them and before they were accorded the right to be heard. And yet that was the ruling of the Court of Appeals. So what happened? Nothing. The suspension was implemented. Every minute of suppression of freedom of expression is a violation of a fundamental and a sacred constitutional right. So every minute that we are not able to air is a violation not only of the rights of SMNI and the journalists by SMNI, but the right of the people to information. So the Court of Appeal should have acted on it. And since, unfortunately, SMNI is still in the process of questioning the NTC decision, nothing prevents you and I from going to court and alleging we are hosts of programs which cannot be seen by people now because we're off the air because of the whimsical decision of the NTC. Our right to freedom of expression, our right to freedom of the press is being violated independent of the rights of SMNI. And that's what you and I will do.
Again...
Right? You will join us. You know why I'm asking you? Because having represented many journalists before, and, every issue of journalists, not every, but most of the issues that I had, I was there to defend them. But some journalists would say, we should not join because we should not be the story. I think when it comes to freedom of the press itself, should be a natural advocacy of all journalists.
You caught me off guard there because I was trying to frame a question and I was trying to bring back, ABS-CBN into that question. And I was going to ask whether or not you see any parallelism, between, what you're talking about, in the defending press freedom and then maybe what ABS-CBN had because in my view there were two different things. I agree with you.
It's not apples to apples.
And in my view, it wasn't the journalists who failed, but it was management that failed the journalist in a sense. But at the end of it, it's still journalism that suffers, right?
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you see any parallelism there, but at the same time, people would probably take you to task because say, well, how come you weren't so noisy when all of these things were happening before with ABS-CBN?
Well, because I was presidential spokesperson then.
Okay.
And the position of the president is the decision to grant a franchise is not that of the executive, it is that of Congress. Only Congress can grant that franchise, okay? And remember, because a franchise is a sine qua non requirement for broadcast to happen, then you must comply with it before you can allege violation of rights. Whereas here, we have an existing franchise, for crying out loud. We've not been heard. They have alleged that we violated terms of our franchise. No one has heard us. They put us on preventive suspension and now on indefinite suspension. So certainly, the analogy there is perhaps journalists were in fact silenced. But that is because management in the case of ABS-CBN forgot or overlooked the fact that before you could exercise a right, there's a sine qua non requirement of a franchise. Whereas here, we have that franchise. And while the state has, to some extent, the power to control the franchise because it owns the airwaves, it begins and ends there. Because they also have to recognize now that freedom of expression and freedom of the press are preferred rights in the hierarchy of rights in this country.
From a legal historical perspective, would you say that this is somehow unprecedented? What's
unprecedented. Not even during times of martial law did this happen. There was, the decision of dance. There was at least a resort to a hearing first by the NTC before they were shut down. It was never an instance where they were just shut down. Because even during martial law, the jurisprudence has always been the onus is on government to prove a government interest that will be served by shutting down or by shutting up a journalist or a citizen from exercising their freedom of expression. So it's reversed. The burden is on the side of government.
You're guilty first, right?
Yes. So let them justify first why they want to suppress rather than asking the journalists why they should exercise the right.
Now, let me ask you to put your political hat back on. Would you say that this is something that is temporary because of maybe political developments or maybe even aspirations? Or do you think this is something that's here to stay, what you're seeing now? I mean...
It is here to stay for as long as Speaker Romualdez is in power and for as long as the President does not assert his powers over the Speaker. Unless the President actually shows that he's in control, Speaker Romualdez will continue not only to suppress SMNI but to chill other media installations against criticizing him. And that is why the President has to act soon. Tell Speaker who's in control. Because unless you do so, it's very clear he's not in control.
Well, on that note, we have to take another quick break. Please stay tuned. We're talking to former presidential spokesperson Atty. Roque. We'll be right back.
Magandang umaga Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. Maayong buntag mga kapartner. Magandang araw sa buong mundo.
Magandang araw Pilipinas. Ito ang Pulso ng Bayan.
Hihimayin ang mga pangunahing issue sa ating bayan. Susuriin ang mga kinakailangang malaman ng taong bayan. Aalamin ang pulso ng bawat Pilipino sa mga pangyayari sa ating lipunan. Pulso ng Bayan, alas 7 hanggang alas 9 ng umaga, tuwing Lunes hanggang Biyernes. Kasama ang spokes ng Bayan, Atty. Harry Roque, Admar Vilado at Jade Calabroso. Dito lang sa SMNI.
Welcome back to Business and Politics. We're talking to former presidential spokesperson Atty. Harry Roque. Sir, I'm sure you've talked to your former boss, former President Rodrigo Duterte. I know you can't discuss or disclose everything that you've talked about, but what can you share with us about how he is viewing things? What his mood is these days? Is he positive or is he disappointed? What's his view? What can you share with us?
I think it's just being consistent.
Okay.
You know, in the past, he has said that he was not supportive of Marcos during the campaign, despite the fact that his own daughter ran under Marcos, his own spokesperson ran under Marcos.
Was that really sincere, or was that just political rhetoric?
He really said, and he will still say it, he's a weak leader.
Okay.
Okay, and he doesn't apologize for it. No?
Okay.
So he's being consistent.
Okay.
But one thing I can definitely say is that he has denied any attempt to destabilize this government.
Okay.
And he has reiterated that in case of a military coup, even his daughter will lose her mandate. In fact, he says, if it happens that there's a military coup, he will tell Inday Sara not to be part of that government because she would be basically a puppet of the military, no? So that's the last thing that he wants to happen, because that would mean also an end to the political mandate of the daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte.
Okay.
So in fact, he's very alarmed.
Okay.
So he denies any involvement, but he does say that perhaps the military has a reason.
Okay.
Number one, the fact that we don't know he's in control is number one.
Okay.
I think that's the concern of the military. Who is in control now? And I will say it. The president has to take steps to deny allegations that he is a drug user until now.
Would you know?
And I think to the military, and I share the view of the president, this is now the most important consideration. Because if he is, that would mean the president is really not in control of the country.
Well, would you know if the former president is in touch with President Marcos? I mean, is there a dialogue? I mean, a line between them?
None.
Not so.
You know, when he offered that, you know, when he said that he wanted to talk to the president on SMNI,
yes,
Secretary Chaloy said, of course, anytime, but it has not happened. It has not happened. It was only Secretary Chaloy that said that. No? But, so, that's what he said. He denies outright, but he sees why the military will be agitated. It's not an issue of corruption, but an issue of, is he really in control of the country?
There's a lot of talk about him possibly running in 2025 for the Senate. Is there anything to suggest that, based on what you've talked about, that, you know, or can you share anything about that, you know, based on your discussions with him?
I can only confirm that people with vested interests want him to run.
Okay.
But people like me agree with him that he has nothing to prove anymore.
Okay.
That he is entitled to retire and enjoy the company of his great-grandson.
Right, right. And, you know, going back to this ICC thing, you know, some people view that as sort of a sort of Damocles on his head, you know, if he had any political ambition or any motive to get back into the political arena, that, you know, maybe to say stay away. But how do you see that that development?
Well, you see,
again, from a political perspective.
ICC is a bit touchy because we actually discussed that, no, and I'm covered by attorney-client relations.
Okay.
But what I can probably divulge is he's not afraid to be arrested by authorities pursuant to a warrant issued by the ICC.
No, but
in fact, he's openly asked.
Yeah.
If the military and the police are asked to serve the warrant of arrest on him, because the ICC has no independent international police and rely on cooperation of the Philippine government, all he will do is ask the military and the police, go ahead, do as you please.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you know, you need to educate me a bit here. Because a lot of people, you know, former Senator Terniano saying, you know, the ICC will issue a warrant of arrest, but, you know, I'm not even sure if that is within the powers, or maybe tell us what exactly can the ICC do? I mean, what would be the process if they, as you said, you know, they would have to go through the PNP or the DOJ, or what would be the procedure here if they want to serve, you know, a petition against him?
Well, while the ICC is a proper court, it does not have the power to serve its own writs and processes.
Okay.
It relies 100% on the cooperation of the state, and that is why we have such a brouhaha on whether or not the Philippines will cooperate.
Okay.
But what the president does not appear to fully grasp is that cooperation is not just required on the investigation stage.
Okay.
If we are to believe former Senator Trillanes, they did not even need the government's cooperation and investigation because according to Senator Trillanes, they're done with the process of investigation. But what the president has not said is that he will also not cooperate when it comes to service of the warrant of arrest against the president. That is the most important form of cooperation that the court would require from a state party, because without jurisdiction over the person, the case cannot proceed.
Well, he did say that he will not lift a finger. I mean, not exact quote.
To investigate. They can come in, they will monitor them, but the most important issue of cooperation is arrest.
Okay.
And he was silent.
Okay. So, assuming that the ICC wants to do this, they would have to. What do? Do they write to the Philippine government?
They write through the ambassador of the Philippines to The Hague, and the ambassador of the Philippines to The Hague will request a DFA to communicate with proper authorities, and proper authorities here for purposes of effecting the warrant of arrest would now be the PNP or the armed forces of the Philippines.
What would be the implication of withdrawing from the ICC? I mean, if they, are we compelled to follow? Because I mean, we withdrew from it during your term, right? So
absolutely not. We are not under any compulsion to cooperate. Why? Because of a decided case already by the ICC itself.
Okay.
Now, any withdrawal from the ICC does not take effect instantly.
Okay.
It will only take effect a year after the deposit of the instrument of withdrawal.
Okay.
Now, the ICC is unique in the sense that the prosecutor can't do anything without consent of the court through the pretrial chamber. And this was one way of enticing the United States to join, because the United States has always complained that the prosecutor is too powerful, can sue sitting presidents, and yet has no accountability because in the U.S., attorney generals are elected. So to entice the United States to join, every step of the way, the prosecutor has to ask. Now, when does the court procedure properly begin?
Okay.
It begins with the prosecutor asking for leave to commence preliminary investigation.
Okay.
Now, if effectivity, therefore, of the withdrawal comes a year after instrument of withdrawal, deposit of instrument of withdrawal, necessarily that leave must be asked by the prosecutor and granted within the 1-year period that the state remains a member, even if it had already deposited the instrument of withdrawal. And in the case of Burundi, this was precisely the ruling of the court.
Okay.
That because in Burundi, the preliminary investigation was granted during the 1-year period after withdrawal, then the investigation can continue.
Okay.
But in the case of the Philippines, the investigation was requested a year after the withdrawal had already taken effect. So obviously, that ICC had lost its jurisdiction forever.
What about the political implications here? Because obviously, even if that doesn't prosper, this may have some influence on how people will choose, both in 2025 and in 2028.
I think
what's your view?
The most immediate is the president's insights into the matter.
Okay.
He says he's not afraid of being served the warrant of arrest.
Okay.
And we leave it to the people if they will allow his arrest.
What does that mean? That sounds pretty ominous.
I leave it to you to conclude because he did not explain.
Okay. Well,
he did not explain.
Yeah.
But to him, it's a political question.
Now,
the Marcos administration may cooperate to arrest him. The issue is, number one, will any policeman or any military person actually arrest him? Now, number two, if they find, will the people allow them to arrest him and bring him to The Hague?
Now, this is going to the hypothetical. Now, if he decides to run in the Senate, and he has a viable chance of winning because
not just viable, he's number one in all the surveys.
Well, he's still very popular.
Yeah.
Would being a senator grant him some immunity to? What the ICC is doing? Or?
Where the ICC has jurisdiction, immunity is not a defense. Remember, the precedent for this is, the Nazi trial of Nuremberg. No?
I see.
So immunity is never a defense, but to the president, it's clear that since the ICC requires consent to be a member and requires consent as a cornerstone of jurisdiction. If that consent had already been withdrawn and had become effective, then there is no duty to cooperate because the court has ceased to have jurisdiction.
So you would say that, the ICC would not be a motivation for the former president to re-enter politics?
No, nothing can be a motivation for him to re-enter politics.
Now,
He's done, and I agree.
And I know you said you agree, and that you said he deserved to rest. But what's his mood like? Is he in a fighting mood? Is he, as you said, just being stoic about it and let things happen and just?
Let's just say he's in an accepting mood.
Okay.
If the people will allow his arrest, if the soldiers and the policemen for whom he conducted and the drug war and whom he defended, leading to the complaints to be filed against him, will arrest him, he will accept that fate.
Is he concerned about the possible violence that may erupt because of if a warrant is served on him? Is he worried about that at all?
All I'm saying is he will leave it to the people.
I see.
He will make it into a political question. And if the administration cooperates on the issue of arrest, they better be prepared also to respond to how the Filipino people will respond to this political question.
But knowing him more than the average Filipino, right? Do you think he would be the kind of person who would let violence happen, or would intervene and say, look, I'm old enough, as you said, I'll accept whatever comes to me and stop all of this violence? Is he something like that, or would he just step back and let things happen?
Well, I accepted his statement on its face value.
Okay.
He will let the people decide on his fate.
Okay.
Either way, let the people decide.
All right. Well, with that, while we ponder on it, we have to take another break. You're watching Business and Politics. We're talking to former presidential spokesperson Atty. Roque. We'll be right back.
Problema nyo, itawag kay Panelo. Ikaw ba'y may suliranin na may kinalaman sa mga ahensya ng ating pamahalaan? Inihahandog ng SMNI ang programang makakapiling ninyo sa araw-araw na maaring ninyong maging daingan. Tampok ang dating Chief Legal Counsel ng nakaraang Pangulo, ang veteranong abogado na si Atty. Salvador Sal Panelo.
Bishops.
Tulong at payo tagapamagitan sa ating mga lingkod bayan. Problema nyo, itawag kay Panelo. Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 9 hanggang alas 10 ng umaga. Dito lamang sa SMNI. Ang totoong boses ng bayan.
Welcome back to Business and Politics. We're talking to Atty. Roque. Sir, do you see an end game at all? Or is it too early to ponder that? I know we're in the middle of all of these things that are very fluid, but how do you see it playing out?
Well, you see, you need to have the kind of experience that former President Duterte has.
Okay.
To have faith that the people will eventually sit in judgment.
Okay.
What's important now is if the president wants to be viewed as the real leader in this country, he needs to stand by what he has said.
Okay.
That he will not cooperate with the ICC no matter what, despite the fact that we know that the presidential cousin has defied him many, many times on very important issues, including on charter change and the PIRMA mode, as it is being implemented. Otherwise, the people will once again exercise their sovereign rights and decide on many important issues affecting the country, including whether or not the former President Duterte should stand trial at The Hague. Okay.
Now, the president is one thing, or the former president is one thing, but his allies is another. Are they mobilizing? We're talking about your plans for 2025 or 2028. Are you thinking about that because of maybe in relation to what's going on now? I mean, are you thinking about going back into politics?
Well, I was once a congressman, and I can't understand how the Speaker has been able to get away with everything that he has done so far.
Okay.
Of course, the culture in Congress is that the Speaker is God, but with certain limitations. He is not higher than the President. And it seems to me that the congressmen have accepted the fact that the Speaker can defy the President. I'm in fact appealing to my former colleagues in Congress. No? Think again if you think the Speaker has the ear of the President because he has been rebuffed. But perhaps what has been keeping them from making a decision to change the leadership in the House is precisely despite the fact that the Speaker has openly defied the President, there have been no consequences. So if the President wants to show the people that he is in command, he will change the leadership in the House because in the first place, there's no Speaker in this country that's been chosen as Speaker without endorsement of the President. But that is the beginning. In fact, I think the political tension will continue to rise until the President decides to do away with the presidential cousin as Speaker.
Do you think that will happen at all, or do you think that's wishful thinking at this point? Because he is family after all, as I say, blood is thicker than water.
If the survival of his administration will depend on whether or not the Speaker should stay in office, I would say he should decide to let him
That's
go.
a pretty heavy statement to make. I mean, are we really at that point where we're talking about the survival of the administration, or are we talking about a few bumps here that we can assign to maybe, say, politics as usual?
It started as a petty dispute between the Speaker and the Vice President because the Vice President referred to him as tambaluslos.
Yeah.
Now it is a fight between the Speaker, the Vice President, and the entire Senate. Then it will be a fight between the Speaker, the Vice President, the Senate, and the former President of the Republic. So it's getting bigger, and I think the President should realize by now that the Speaker is more of an extra luggage to him rather than of any assistance to his administration.
What is the bigger implication here? Because, as you said, it's happening very early, and yet there are a number of factors that, issues that need to be discussed. There is foreign policy, there's economic development, and it seems to me that we are talking about politics too early when we should be talking about, some of these, economic goals, these external threats. Do you think these will be set aside because of the intensity of the political discourse that's, as you said, happening very early?
Well, in the first place, this political discourse should not have happened this early, precisely.
Right.
So I would suggest that you direct your question to the Speaker himself.
So,
he has to answer that.
So did you say, speaking about questions that you need to answer, did you say that you were thinking about 2025 or 2028, or have you made a decision?
I just think if the Speaker will stay in office beyond 2025, that someone has at least to challenge him openly in the floors of Congress.
Okay.
And I'd like to do that.
All right.
So if I have to go back to Congress to do that, I certainly will. But I'm hoping that there would not be a necessity for it, because meanwhile, I'm hoping that the President will realize he really is extra luggage.
Is this something that you're hearing from the other people around the former President, that they're also maybe, just like you, thinking about maybe stepping up and, entering the elected office to do something because like you, they're not happy with what they're seeing?
Well, my prediction, in fact, is now that the budget has been passed, many of my former colleagues will start speaking up.
Okay.
Many of them have opted, in fact, to join PFP and not Lakas. Why?
Okay.
Because they cannot work with the Speaker.
Okay.
Why else would they join PFP instead of Lakas when the Speaker is a member of Lakas, no? And the chairman or president or whatever, king of Lakas.
Sure,
Let's just call him
sure.
king because I think he likes that title better, no? So I think the seeds of dissent are there.
Okay.
Because remember, you're talking of politicians who are in absolute control of their districts. Some of them are members of Congress and their spouses are mayors. So they cannot be treated like children.
Okay.
And ordered to do things, no? Just because the Speaker says so.
Do you think there is maybe some maybe room to give, elbow room to, that we can give to the Speaker here? Do you think there is, maybe if he's mistaken, as you say, is there redemption or recourse of action that he can take at this point? Because as you said, it's very, very early, right? I mean, there should be time to remedy things before the midterms, right?
Of course, the remedial measure would be, if he does not want to lose his post, stop this mode of action that has been very divisive and just support the agenda of the president. And of course, promote unity within the unity team in the first place.
And are you surprised that maybe some of the people that were with you with the unity team or are now in Congress are going along? I mean, is that just political game?
I will say this.
Okay.
The closest allies of the president were not with us in the elections.
Okay.
You're talking of Zaldico, chairman of appropriations. Okay. Why? Did he deliver votes in Bicol for the president? You're talking of the majority floor leader, who was not even allowed into the reception room when we were in Zamboanga because he defied the president agreement. There was an agreement that he would stay outside the stadium where the rally was being conducted in Zamboanga City, and Lobregat would be inside. No? So as a result, he was not allowed to enter the place where the president had lunch. I had to go out and talk to him. That's now the majority floor leader of Speaker Martin Romualdez. Please disabuse your mind.
Sure.
The people, the leading lieutenants of the speakers were with us in the unity team. They were not. They were not.
I want to switch topics a bit because, it seems to me that, because, SMNI is caught up in the mix here. Presumably because of its association with the former president. And now, Senator Risa Ontiveros is conducting an investigation about his religious organization. You've met Pastor Apollo Kibuloy. There's a lot of allegations around him. What do you know that maybe the public doesn't know about Pastor Kibuloy?
Well, what the people do know is everyone is accorded the presumption of innocence unless proven otherwise. And all the allegations made by the witnesses of Senator Ontiveros should be ventilated in court, because obviously the Senate has no power to declare anyone guilty of for violating any crime.
No, what I mean is let me refine it this way, because I had a chance to interview Pastor Kibuloy a couple of times. One of the very first questions I asked him, is it true that you tell people that you're God? And he says, no, I mean, I'm just an ordinary guy like you and everybody else. And but that is a side of that I would not have known had I not had a chance to talk to him. But I was wondering if you had similar realizations about what his personality is, what his character.
All I can say is if I had his build, he wouldn't have to rape anyone. Boy, he's fit. In all these things, file the proper charges in court if you have the evidence. But don't do it through the court of public opinion. The fact that they're doing it through the court of public opinion means they have sinister motives.
And do you think this is happening because of the political discussion we were having earlier? Do you see it as something separate? What's your view? Is this all part of the grand scheme of the things that are happening too early, or it's just coincidental? What do you think?
It's inevitably linked.
Okay.
Why? Because it started with a petty dispute over Tambaloslos. The speaker retaliated by taking away the confidential fund of the vice president. He thought everything was done and over with. The vice president openly snubbed him during the arrival honors for the president after he came from APEC. He then retaliated by asking his allies to file that resolution to cooperate with the ICC. Now, the president, of course, the former president, spoke up in SMNI, calling Congress the most corrupt institution. Now, that's what triggered the ire against SMNI, because we were instrumental in delivering what really is a true message, that of all branches of government, Congress is the most corrupt. Because as I have revealed myself in my own program, congressmen have been getting away with the fact that their liquidation is a mere certification that the public funds received by them monthly has been spent for a public purpose. Whereas in the executive, we have to provide the receipt even for lunches that we bought for journalists when I was a spokesperson. So what's wrong with what the president said, that the Congress is the most corrupt of all institutions? It is. The fact that they're the only branch of government that has a liquidation by mere certification proves this.
But you see the irony in that, though, I mean, is that, you were in government before, right? And people would throw that back at you and say, how come you didn't do anything when you were in power?
Because I wanted to pass my pet legislation and did so. You see, in order to be successful at passing legislation, and my kind of legislation included universal health care, free lunch, the national AIDS policy, free irrigation, you need to build a consensus. And you don't build a consensus if you pick up fights with your colleagues. And that's why the sense of collegiality in Congress is very strong, because you need to have the number of votes needed to pass legislation. So, do I regret not squealing on Congress at the time when I was a member? Not really, because in exchange, I was the one that passed the most number of national bills that have made the most difference in the lives of people. No? So I think it was a fair trade-off. The silence that brought me a sense of collegiality that enabled me to pass legislation, it was well worth it.
Well, thank you for a very frank discussion. I think we can talk for hours and hours.
Yes.
But that's the time that we have today. Secretary, before we go, maybe you'd like to leave our guests with a message?
Well, not the guests.
Yeah.
First to my colleagues, my former colleagues in Congress.
Okay.
I consider my days in Congress as my happy days. And I also consider that the legislative output that I had, which would not have happened without the support of my former colleagues, universal health care, from free irrigation, free tertiary education, would not have happened if we did not have that sense of community as an institution. But there comes a point in time when you need to prioritize the integrity of the institution itself. Congress now is looked down upon as the worst of all of our institutions, and the survey says so. So I appeal first and foremost to my former colleagues, save the institution. It's time to change the leadership in the House. Then I appeal to the candidate for president whom I campaigned for, President Bongbong Marcos. I do not know why, Mr. President, you allow your cousin to defy you. But the only way to assure the Filipino people that you're in charge is to let the speaker know you're in charge. It's time to consider changing who your speaker shall be.
Well, very clear, if not very provocative. Secretary, thank you very much for your time. I'd like to thank the audience watching this program and all those watching the replay. I'd like to thank also Pastor Roque for making this program possible. This has been Business and Politics. I'm Dante Klink, and I'll see you next week. Sir?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Magandang umaga Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao.
Maayong buntag mga kapartner. Magandang araw sa buong mundo. Magandang araw Pilipinas. Ito ang Pulso ng Bayan.
Hihimayin ang mga pangunahing issue sa ating bayan. Susuriin ang mga kinakailangang malaman ng taong bayan. Aalamin ang pulso ng bawat Pilipino sa mga pangyayari sa ating lipunan. Pulso ng Bayan, alas 7 hanggang alas 9 ng umaga, tuwing Lunes hanggang Biyernes. Kasama ang spokes ng Bayan, Atty. Harry Roque, Admar Vilado at Jade Calabroso. Dito lang sa SMNI.
Alam mo ba kung ano ang cha-cha o charter change?
Wala po akong idea ma'am kasi hindi ako masyado nagsistay dito sa Pinas.
Wala po kasi masyadong information kasi tungkol diyan.
Di po ako masyadong familiar kung paano po siya nag-work, pero naririnig ko na po siya.
Wala talagang idea regarding sa charges stay.
Hindi ako sure po.
Ang pag-intindi ko sa charter change, pira yan
Ako talaga hindi ko pa lubos talaga na maiintindihan yan.
Wala talaga akong idea kung ano talaga ibig sabihin ng chat-chat talaga.
Kung ano mas nakakabuti, siyempre, yun ang dapat baguhin.
Ito lang yung kahulugan ng chat-chat. Mas maganda kung binabago para mapalitan yung ibang walang kabuluhan.
Charter change, hindi ba yung sa tungkol sa DNR yun?
Yung charter change, yun yung pagbabago ng saligang batas, no? Yung Philippine Constitution ng 1987 ba yan? Oo.
Ano nga ba ang dahilan bakit matunog ang charter change o ang pagbabago ng konstitusyon ng bansa? Ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin nito? Ang Chacha ay ang legal na proseso para baguhin ang kasalukuyang 1987 Constitution na umiiral sa bansa. Maaaring isagawa ito sa tatlong pamamaraan: ang People's Initiative, Constituent Assembly at ang Constitutional Convention. Isa-isahin natin ito. Ay ang People's Initiative na sadyang matunog ngayon dahil sa mga kumakalat na isyu tungkol dito. Ang proseso ng pagsasagawa ng People's Initiative ay nakasaad sa Republic Act 6735 o ang Initiative and Referendum Act. Batay dito, ang publiko ay maaaring mag-propose ng mga pagbabago sa konstitusyon sa pamamagitan ng pagkakaroon ng petisyon na pinirmahan ng aabot sa 12% ng kabuang bilang ng mga rehistradong botante. Ang bawat distrito rin ay kinakailangang mairepresenta ng 3% ng rehistradong botante. Mahaba ang prosesong ito at sinasabing magastos dahil sa mga kinakailangang isagawa para makuha ang kinakailangang bilang ng pirma. Dadaan pa rin ito sa verifikasyon ng Commission on Elections o COMELEC. Kung makuha na ang kinakailangang bilang ng pirma at matapos na mailathala ng 2 beses sa mga pahayagan, ang lahat ng botante sa bansa ay magsasagawa ng referendum at magdedesisyon kung aaprubahan ba o hindi ang nasabing pagbabago sa konstitusyon. Kinakailangan ay sumang-ayon ang publiko para maisakatuparan ito. Magiging epektibo ito 15 araw matapos na mailathala sa Official Gazette o pahayagan ng kadalasang binabasa ng publiko o general circulation. Ang Constituent Assembly naman ay binubuo ng lahat ng mga miyembro ng Bicameral Congress ng Pilipinas. Ito ay ang Senado at House of Representatives. Sa ilalim ng Article 17 ng 1987 Constitution, ang mga pagbabago ay aaprubahan sa pamamagitan ng boto ng 3/4 ng lahat ng mga miyembro ng Kongreso. Ang mababa at mataas na kapulungan ng Kongreso ay bumoboto ng magkahiwalay para sa mga pagbabago. Sa Constitutional Convention, ang mamamayan naman ang boboto sa mga uupo para aralin at baguhin ang saligang batas. Mayroon ng 5 Constitutional Convention na ginawa sa bansa. Nariyan ang Malolos Congress, Philippine Constitutional Convention of 1934, Preparatory Committee for Philippine Independence, Philippine Constitutional Convention of 1971, at Philippine Constitutional Commission na itinalaga noong 1986. Sa ilalim ng charter change, maaring ipanukala ang amendment o revision sa saligang batas. Mukhang pareho, pero magkaiba ang dalawang ito. Ang amendments ay yung mga pagbabago sa ilang probisyon ng konstitusyon nang hindi iniiba ang istruktura nito, habang ang revision naman ay tumutukoy sa posibleng pagsulat muli ng buong konstitusyon. Ay ilan lamang sa mga pangunahing konsepto na dapat nating malaman kaugnay sa pagbabago ng ating konstitusyon. Kaya ano ba sa tingin ninyo ang pinaka-epektibong paraan? At ano rin ba ang gusto ninyong baguhin sa ating saligang batas? Panahon na nga ba upang baguhin ito? Hihintayin po namin ang inyong mga tugon. Patuloy po naming pakikinggan ang inyong mga boses, mga kababayan, dito lamang sa SMNI. Para sa Diyos at sa Pilipinas nating mahal.
Subscribe to SMNI News Channel and turn on the notification bell to keep you up to date. Also visit our official social media accounts and join our community on Viber and Telegram.